Hello, my beautiful blossoms, blooms, and buds. I'm Rosebud Reads, and welcome to my book garden. And welcome to our Holiday Fanfic Special. Today, we are actually reading the start of a two-part series, and it is Brunch Warfare by the lovely, the Feels Whale, miscellea, who we actually have done a fic for before. It was our Thanksgiving fic. Miscellea was kind enough to let me use a few more of their works this holiday season, which I am very grateful for. I have to say that Mycelia is probably one of my favorite fanfic artists for MXTX. So go check them out. This fic is linked in the description below. Go say hey to the the author, and give him some kudos, give him some likes, give him some love. And I hope you enjoy. We're just gonna go ahead and jump right into it. This is a Scum Villain self-saving system fan fiction. MXTX owns Scum Villain. 7C's owns Scum Villain. I do not. I do not make anything from this. I am doing this just for fun. So, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and just jump right into it. Okay. Brunch Warfare. Summary. Oh, by the Feels Whale Mycelia. Summary. Brunch went south about 2 steps away from the front entrance of Shen Yuan's favorite cafe. A place with free Wi-Fi, big squishy chairs, custom mimosa pitchers, and an endless avocado toast special. He arrived bright and early with his computer bag under one arm and the intention of staking out one of the solo tables in back for the rest of the morning until he'd finished his current editing project. The project in question was the latest offering from airplane shooting towards the sky after he broke out from web novels. So endless mimosas and carbohydrates would be necessary for Shen Yuan to make it through with his sanity and blood pressure intact. Shen Qinghua was late on his most recent draft, but the earliest chapters had been finalized, so he could get started on that at least. However, his phone pinged just as he reached the entrance, and Shen Yuan made the fatal mistake of pausing to check the message. Shenju, too late now, but brace yourself. We're inside. Qi Gua set us both up. Or the one where Shen Yuan lost his breakup, but Luo Binghe is about to kill it on the rebound. So notes. This is part 1 of 2 short stories. The second story will be told from Luo Binghe's perspective. Subscribe to the series for alerts. See the end of the work for more notes. Brunch went south about 2 steps away from the front entrance of Shen Yuan's favorite cafe. A place with free Wi-Fi, big squishy chairs, custom mimosa pitchers, and an endless avocado toast special. He arrived bright and early with his computer bag under one arm and the intention of staking out one of the solo tables in back for the rest of the morning until he finished his current editing project. The project in question was the latest offering from airplane shooting towards the sky after he broke out from web novels. So endless mimosas and carbohydrates would be necessary for Shen Yuan to make it through with his sanity and blood pressure intact. Shen Qinghua was late on his most recent draft, but the earliest chapters had been finalized, so he could get started on that at least. However, his phone pinged just as he reached the entrance, and Shen Yuan made the fatal mistake of pausing to check the message. Shenju, too late now, but brace yourself. We're inside. Qi Gua set us both up. Shen Yuan froze and very slowly looked up to scan the tables inside. Sure enough, there they were. 2 tall, elegant men sitting side by side like a matched set of GQ models. Shenju, dressed in a white linen suit, was looking at his phone. Yu Qi was relaxed at his side, wearing a more sedate yet still painfully well-cut black suit, occasionally glancing at the door. I can't even have my own hangout spaces now? Shen Yuan wondered, suddenly bleak. He knew that he'd never be able to walk in here again and not scan the faces inside for Yu Chi's beatific smile. This was never going to just be his spot ever again. Yu Chi spotted him, waving excitedly, before Shen Yuan made up his mind to escape. Shenju sighed and put away his phone, leaning into Yu Chi's side with a resigned expression. Shen Yuan's courage abruptly failed him, and instead of heading to the counter to order, leaving himself with no choice except to then go join Yu Chi and Shenju at their table, he went into the men's room, shut the door behind himself with deliberate care, and went to brace himself against the sink as he concentrated on breathing for a while instead of his whirling thoughts. Someone said from over by the other sink, "Are you all right?" His gaze snapped up to, "Well." For a second, Shen Yuan forgot other men even existed. Then he recognized the tall, beautiful, and muscular man who was standing off to one side of the bathroom and exuding that slight air of helplessness you get when you are in close quarters with a person who is working up to a panic attack. Even so, Shen Yuan recognized those wine-colored eyes, those long tousled black curls, and that sensual mouth, all of which had been responsible for Shen Yuan's very first gay panic back in high school. Bing He had come to one of the middle schools that fed into Shen Yuan's high school program shortly after Bing He's adopted mother died, and he ended up in the foster system. It was a good school, but Bing He's grades weren't great. He'd gotten in through a magnet lottery in his foster parents' neighborhood and got entered into the Big Brother program in an attempt to give him a little more of a support network than he probably was getting in his foster home. There was a lot of pressure to put on a teenager, but Bing He was so sincere and tried so hard that Shen Yuan had never seen it as a burden. Shen Yuan wanted to help, and Bing He had repaid the attention by blossoming. Shen Yuan had been the one to argue their guidance office into having Bing He tested for a learning disorder when it became clear that Bing He's foster parents were not interested in pursuing a diagnosis, despite the fact that he was functionally illiterate. Lack of effort or intelligence wasn't the problem. The kid exhausted himself with how hard he tried and ended up sobbing into Shen Yuan's shoulder on more than one occasion when it all became too much. There had to be some reason, and Shen Yuan, all of 17 years old at the time, had been the only person who seemed interested in advocating for Bing He in order to find out what it was. The issue turned out to be dyslexia, so Bing He got put into special classes where he finally received specialized attention. Once he had the tools he needed, he absorbed information like a starving little sponge. It got to the point where the guidance counselor was talking about putting him in the gifted and talented program, but then one day Bing He just vanished from school. "Bing He," Shen Yuan rasped, I heard you were back in town." Even in his distress, he couldn't keep the happy note out of his voice. One of their mutuals from the Big Brother, Big Sister program had spotted Bing He during some kind of networking event and texted Shen Yuan afterwards to see if he had heard anything about it. She hadn't been able to get close enough to introduce herself, but Bing He had been the unofficial mascot of the literature club, so she'd recognized him. Shen Yuan couldn't help his elevator eyes as he took in what had become of the kid who used to follow him around like a fluffy little sheep. Chi Ching Chi hadn't lied to him. Not to put too fine a point on it, but puberty had hit Bing He like a truck the year he turned 16, and Shen Yuan, 18 at the time and deep in the closet, had been totally unable to handle it. Apparently those gains kept coming even after they were separated. Not even Bing He's baggy, prudish button-up and cargo shorts could hide his excellent figure or glass-sharp cheekbones. Even the birthmark between his eyebrows looked sleeker somehow, like someone had carefully tidied the edges with a tattoo gun so it looked like a Huadian instead of a little port wine splotch. Most importantly, though, Bing He looked like he was in a good place. He'd always been wearing hand-me-downs back then, things that showed visible wear. Bingha's current outfit had clearly only ever had one owner, and it was all made of quality materials, although Shen Yuan could have made some comments about the fit and all the wrinkles in the pants. It looked like they'd arrived from the store cuffed a lot higher, and Bingha had never bothered to steam out the creases once he rolled them down. Well, Bingha was probably straight, so yeah, there was a good chance he didn't know that steamers existed. Bingha's look of concern melted into an awkward but pleased expression. Yuan Ge recognizes me, he said. I didn't think you would recognize me if I didn't introduce myself. I changed a lot. That was the absolute truth. No, I do. Shen Yuan patted himself down with shaking hands, feeling a little embarrassed. He hadn't bothered to dress up too much because this wasn't supposed to have been a social brunch. It was supposed to have been a working brunch. Shen Yuan's hair was flat and hung in his face. He was wearing his oversized comfort cardigan with the round, big glasses he wore because they worked best, not because they looked particularly good. Figured that this was what he looked like on a day when he had to confront not only Chi Gua, but also Liu Bingha after an intense glow-up. Sorry, I guess I scared you. What happened? Bingha got a little closer, edging in like Shen Yuan was a wild animal that might startle if he moved too fast. Did someone out there upset you? His tone made it sound like he was willing to go do something about it if Shen Yuan said yes. Do you need help? Bingha hasn't changed at all. Shen Yuan felt his nerves settle a bit. Bingha had always been a nice kid. He tried hard and was painfully sincere even in the face of all the setbacks in his life. Seeing Bingha made Shen Yuan feel a little bad about getting so worked up over having to face his ex. Just looking at Bingha's earnest little face had always made Shen Yuan's problems feel smaller and more manageable. Evidently, that hadn't changed. Already, Shen Yuan's pulse felt slower. I really missed you, Shen Yuan thought, but didn't say. It felt a little like a crucial support had just been snapped back into place in his life, and everything was suddenly so much steadier. Shen Yuan and Bingha had about 2 years together at school before Bingha's biological father crawled out of whatever hole he'd been hiding in all that time and suddenly decided he was interested in his son. The social worker must have just shown up at Bingha's foster parents' house and taken straight away. Bingha didn't have a phone, and there was no computer at his foster home, so Shen Yuan had no way to get in contact with him outside of school. Bingha didn't even have social media back then. He was there one day and gone the next. Shen Yuan only found out what happened when the guidance counselor finally got around to letting him know about a month later. Even then, he was only told because he hadn't taken the loss of his friend well at all, and his parents were starting to ask the school administration uncomfortable questions. Now they were adults, and Bingha was the one fussing over him. How weird. Shen Yuan tried to laugh it off. It's nothing. Just some personal drama. Bingha doesn't need to worry about it. Yungua is making me more worried instead of less, Bingha replied, unamused. Let me help. You can't, Shen Yuan deflated. My ex-fiancé is out there with his new boyfriend. They're, waiting for me to join them. You know how I am about confrontation. He grimaced and shrugged. I just needed a minute. You know how it is, right? There's nothing really to do about it. Bingha went very, very still, and Shen Yuan took his silence for reluctant agreement. How could anyone get Shen Yuan out of this situation without him looking like the melodramatic ex? Shen Yuan couldn't get Shen Yuan out of this situation without looking like the melodramatic ex. He pretty much was the melodramatic ex. The problem was that it had been an amicable breakup at first. Yu Qi was a difficult person to protect your feelings from. He was a genuinely nice person. It was just that he had a way of being cruel by complete accident. He wasn't here to rub Shen Yuan's nose in his new relationship, even though that was, essentially, what was about to happen. Shen Yuan told himself that he'd be fine. He'd get through brunch and go home to binge some of his web novels to self-medicate. His productive morning was shot anyway. Might as well go whole hog. Yun Gua was going to get married. Binghe's tone was almost impossible to decipher. It didn't work out. Shen Yuan ignored that same old twist in his guts he got whenever the subject came up. He'd met Qi Gua in college. Shen Yuan had been a sophomore and Yu Qi was finishing up his postdoctorate. Qi Gua introduced them around, and they wound up in the same circle of friends. Then later, they'd started dating. There'd been something tragic and beautiful about Qi Gua back in those days, and Shen Yuan had an instinct to care that his friends and family didn't generally let him indulge. They'd worked out well enough that, despite some reservations, Shen Yuan hadn't seen a compelling reason to say no when Qi Gua proposed. The reason why Qi Gua had seemed so fragile when they met was named Shenju, Yu Qi's own white moonlight from when he was a teenager. Shen Yuan wasn't privy to all the details, but what he did know mirrored his own story with Binghe to a disturbing degree of coincidence. Yu Qi and Shenju got separated somehow, and Shenju disappeared so thoroughly that after a certain point, Qi Gua had pursued the worst. It turned out that Shenju was not dead. He just got disappeared by the foster system the same way Binghe did. Although Shenju got put into the troubled teen industry instead of being rehomed with a biological relative and spent close to a year in a congregate care facility. From there, Shenju got into an intense boarding school program overseas that might well have been affiliated with the care facility he'd graduated from, where you are no longer considered an at-risk youth, but they still didn't let you have social media or unsupervised internet time. He'd attended college through another international program before finally coming back to his hometown to teach at the same super pretentious private boarding school where Yu Qi served as the president of the board of trustees. You could call it a fated reunion. Shen Yuan's engagement didn't last long after Qi Gua and Shenju were reunited. Xiao Yuan, Qi Gua's tone, his posture, even the way he couldn't hold Shen Yuan's gaze for more than a minute or two, all told him what was coming. I think we should talk. Thank God, Shen Yuan remembered thinking, surprising even himself at the time. We aren't going through with it. Their approaching wedding date had been looming in his mind like a cliff as he came to realize that, well, he loved Qi Gua. He didn't want to spend the rest of his life with the man. Breaking up had been liberating at first. Shen Yuan owned the apartment, so his living situation wasn't affected, and he hadn't called Qi Gua for nothing. Yu Qi's affection was very much that of an older brother, and Shen Yuan had started to find it more smothering than reassuring. Even worse, he was starting to question why they even gotten together, and they were no longer in a place where Shen Yuan would forget what he was upset about because Qi Gua happened to take his shirt off. No one was concerned about what he ate or if he ate. He could stay up if he wanted or needed to. He could work out at his own pace and schedule. Became a little bit of a night owl, but the world didn't end. His health didn't even suffer. Slowly, Shen Yuan's life felt more like something that reflected the person living it. Being with Yu Chi had felt a bit like having a full-time life coach who never went home, and once he was free of it, he didn't think he could ever go back. Shen Yuan didn't have Shenju's big bitch energy, which could halt Yu Chi's benevolent suffocation in its tracks. Shenju and Yu Chi worked better as a couple, and that was a good thing. Except when they'd invaded his favorite brunch joint in an effort to waylay him. When he considered it objectively, Shen Yuan and Qi Gua had very little in common. Not even their hobbies were complementary. Qi Gua was into experiences. He liked to travel and go hiking at dawn. Shen Yuan was more into staycations. If he traveled, it was for a fandom event or a foodie destination. A quiet little question had started to throb in the back of Shen Yuan's mind like a second pulse. Why were we even together? Then Shen Yuan happened to meet Shenju. It was an accidental encounter. No one was trying to run into anyone else. Shen Yuan was on his way out of a bodega near his apartment when Qi Gua came in with Shenju. There was no question in Shen Yuan's mind about who the slightly shorter and reed-thin man at Qi Gua's side was, not with the way that Qi Gua's entire intention was hyper-focused on him. This was Shenju, and they happened to pass close enough for Shen Yuan to get a good and damning look at his face. Shenju was about 6 years or so older than Shen Yuan, but seeing his face was still like looking into a very uptight mirror. They could have been twins, and suddenly all those questions Shen Yuan had never quite managed to work up the nerve to ask Qi Gua had an answer. They were together because Shen Yuan was a replacement for Shenju. He'd spent 3 years as a placeholder for someone else, and everything he thought he knew about his own relationship turned out to be false. Ironically, that messed him up worse than the actual separation, and Shen Yuan had a hard time explaining to people why, so he dealt with it mostly by not dealing with it. He'd stop picking up as often when Qi Gua called. He avoided the places where he knew Qi Gua would be. The thing was, it was hard to avoid Qi Gua. He wasn't the kind of person who just dropped out of your life, which was generally a good thing, except when Shen Yuan wanted some alone time to nurse his ego back to life. It took a while before he was really able to leave his apartment without checking every corner for Qi Gua, but he got there. It helped that while Shen Yuan lost some friends in the divorce, it was not as many as you would think, given how popular and charismatic Qi Gua could be. Lu Qingge still dragged Shen Yuan to the gym and sometimes bought him a smoothie if there was news going around about Qi Gua, but never made him talk about it. Lu Qingge's sister hung out with them sometimes too. They generally did movie nights, as neither of the Lu siblings were stellar conversationalists, but it was nice because neither of them cared if he talked while the movie was on. Qi Qingqi, like Lu Qingge, stopped talking to Yu Qi altogether. Shen Yuan was pretty sure Mu Qingfan hung out with both groups separately, but discussed neither with the other. The biggest surprise for Shen Yuan was his relationship with Shenju himself. Neither of them were idiots. The chances of someone having the same surname and a physical resemblance as strong as theirs could only have a few explanations. One day, Shen Yuan came slinking out of his apartment to find that Shenju had staked it out and wanted to talk. Shen Yuan tentatively braced himself for a totally unnecessary "stay away from my man" conversation and took him to a nearby cafe that was busy enough that it would be hard for Shenju to murder him in broad daylight. To his shock, the subject didn't come up. Shenju didn't mention Yu Qi even once. He was more interested in Shen Yuan's background, a subject he had a lot of very precise questions about. The answers were maybe not all that surprising, but still came as a shock to Shen Yuan. Shen Yuan was adopted, and so was Shenju. They'd both had closed adoptions, so they didn't have convenient birth certificates to compare, but they'd been adopted around the same time and grew up in roughly the same general area. The only thing they retained of their birth families was their surname, which used the same character. Shen Yuan had been a toddler at the time of his adoption. Shen Ju was a bit older, just old enough to remember a car accident, and that there might have been a baby in the car with them. They both knew that the foster system routinely broke up siblings, and from there they could draw the obvious conclusion. Shen Yuan loved his parents, but they were the sort of people who, if the social worker didn't mention that the adorable toddler they were interested in had an older sibling with behavioral issues, wouldn't have asked too many questions about Shen Yuan's background, beyond whether or not there were any adults in his life who might pursue custody. They hadn't done a blood test or anything, but he and Shenju texted sometimes. They had a lot in common and a similar bitchy sense of humor. They did not discuss Qigua unless, as he had just done, Shenju wanted to warn him that Qigua had gotten a brilliant idea. Because Shen Yuan had done nothing to stop him from leaving, Yu Qi thought that they had an amicable breakup. No anger, no fighting, no recrimination. To him, that meant that the breakup had been a good thing, and Shen Yuan's feelings had been as shallow as his own turned out to be, so that meant they could all be friends afterwards. The fact that Shen Yuan and Shen Ju were probably long-lost brothers only made him more determined to maintain the relationship. He was still interested in Shen Yuan's welfare and liked to check in on him like a big brother should. A big brother who'd seen Shen Yuan naked, who might be dating Shen Yuan's actual biological sibling, and definitely had been using him as a placeholder that got dropped the second Shenju re-entered his sphere. Oh, nothing awkward or uncomfortable about that at all. He never really got over his ex, and now they're back together, Shen Yuan explains. It hurts, but I don't think I still could have married him after I found out about it, so this is just, the process. I needed a minute before going over. I'll be all right. Binghe doesn't need to worry. There's nothing scary going on. Binghe looked unconvinced. Here, let me give you my number. Shen Yuan really did want to catch up. At the very least, he didn't want Binghe to vanish out of his life without a trace twice in their lifetimes. I want to catch up. I'd like that. Binghe got out his phone and they exchanged texts. The one Binghe sent read, "Can I take you to dinner later?" Shen Yuan chuckled at it. His mood instantly lifted. Binghe hadn't changed at all. He always sounded like he was flirting. He'd probably broken 1,000,000 hearts since they'd last seen each other. It was a good thing Shen Yuan knew he was straight, or otherwise he might have started to get ideas. Sure, I'm sorry we can't sit down right now. Binghe smiled at him, and it was like the sun peeking out from behind the clouds. Shen Yuan wanted to clutch his heart, shield his eyes, and never look away all at the same time. Binghe had grown up unfairly attractive, and Shen Yuan was so soft for beautiful men. All they had to do was flex or smile, and he wanted to give them anything they asked for. That was, to be honest, part of the reason he'd stayed with Yu Qi as long as he had, despite observing some red flags early on. He had a bad habit of forgetting the stuff that annoyed him as soon as Qigua got naked. I'm sure something will work out, Binghe said. Shen Yuan was probably imagining the odd red glitter in the old school buddy's eyes as he said that. With that, Shen Yuan took himself out of the bathroom and onto the bench, into the breach. 5 minutes later, as he externally admired Yu Qi and Shenju's matching engagement rings, internally he bitterly regretted having not escaped out through the kitchen's loading dock. The stone on Shenju's was easily twice the size of the one Shen Yuan had given back to Yu Qi, and Shen Yuan wondered just how good a person you had to be to really and truly not notice something like that. Whatever the standard was, he'd failed to meet it. It'd really mean a lot to us if Xiao Yuan came to the ceremony, Yu Qi was saying. It's been 2 months since we broke up, Shen Yuan managed not to say. He could see how it had happened that way. Shenju had told him just enough about his past with Yu Qi for him to infer they'd basically been circling each other since they were 13, so this hadn't come completely out of nowhere, but he was holding on to his goodwill by his fingertips at this point. 2 months! Shen Yuan was still finding Yu Qi's stuff in the out-of-the-way corners of his apartment. Expecting Yu Qi to hold back his own relationship just because Shen Yuan still felt like he'd barely gotten his pieces reassembled after becoming the collateral damage of their love story was too much, and he knew it, but did he have to attend the ceremony too? Couldn't he just find out about it later on Facebook like normal people got to? Was there a way he could say no without looking like an asshole? His head was swimming, and it was hard to even form individual syllables, much less smooth and inoffensive demurral as he wanted. He didn't note the significance of a chair moving off in his peripheral vision until someone turned it around to face their table, specifically right next to him. That was the only warning he got before a heavy yet gentle arm settled around his shoulders and warm lips pressed against his temple. Sorry, Yuan Gua, Binghe grinned down at him where Shen Yuan turned, ready to squawk his displeasure. Were you waiting long? Coherent thought abandoned Shen Yuan entirely. In the 5 minutes since he'd left Binghe in the bathroom, the man had taken several levels of himbo. Binghe had let his hair down from its ponytail, so his face was framed by luxuriant, shiny black waves. He had tucked his shirt in so that his black button-up was suddenly form-fitting enough that everyone in the restaurant could see how narrow his waist was compared to his broad shoulders. He'd even cuffed up his cargo pants back into shorts that hit him midway up his powerful thighs. It was crystal clear to all, and Shen Yuan in particular, that Binghe did not ever skip leg day. Shen Yuan wasn't sure, but Binghe might also have suddenly acquired eyeliner. Somehow, his eyelashes looked thicker all of a sudden. Not only that, but fully half his shirt buttons were undone, and Shen Yuan's consciousness dissolved into a cloud of pure lust. It was a good thing he was frozen in place, otherwise he'd probably have ended up getting them all kicked out. There must have been some part of his brain that held a couple of meaningless courtesies in a buffer somewhat, because his mouth said, no, not long, and randomly. Did Binghe order? Not yet. Binghe smiled like they were the only two people in the room, and oh no, Shen Yuan was in real trouble. No one had ever made his higher thought processes shut down like this. Binghe could probably make him do anything he wanted, and Shen Yuan would just smile vaguely, distracted by the knowledge that Binghe waxed his chest. Did Yuan Gua get anything? Shen Yuan slowly shook his head. Not yet. I was chatting with, right. Qigua. Shenju. There were other people around who were not the hot man toying with the fine hair at the base of his neck. Oh, God. Shen Yuan hadn't even realized that he liked that, and now he would never be able to unknow it. Yu Qi was looking a bit like a marble statue. His benign smile was in place, but somehow stiff. Shenju, looked like Christmas had not only come early, but twice. This is my fiancé, Shenju. A pleasure. Shenju had never said that within Shen Yuan's hearing, and even if he had, he'd never once ever sounded like he meant it, except for this singular occasion. His black eyes glittered with amusement as they darted back and forth between his fiancée and the man draped all over Shen Yuan's shoulders. Yu Qi was just asking Yuan if he'd like to attend our wedding next year. hang on. Sorry. Given the vicious and vaguely incredulous side-eye Shenju had been giving Chigua when he extended the invitation, Shenju was volunteering the information specifically to make his fiancée even more uncomfortable. Not even Chigua was immune from Shenju's malicious interference. He'd never yet met a fire he wouldn't throw gasoline on. Oh, that's great! Did you set a date? Bingha's fingertips drifted down the column of Shen Yuan's neck to lightly caress his pulse point, and Shen Yuan suddenly struggled to remember what date they were talking about. Was it important? Probably not. If it was, he probably had a phone reminder set up, so it was fine. Bingha's fingertips drifted down to trace the top edge of Shen Yuan's collarbone, and some of that drifty hormonal haze turned into panic as he realized that it was deliberate. Was Bingha actually straight? Shen Yuan was suddenly having trouble remembering. The 3rd of August. Chigua's eyes darted towards what Bingha's hand was doing and then sharply away. That was probably significant, but if you asked Shen Yuan, then he would have been utterly helpless to explain why right at that moment. That's pretty far out, Bingha mused. I don't know off the top of my head if we're going to be available. We'll have to check our schedules and get back to you. Does Yungua remember anything? He turned a megawatt smile on Shen Yuan that made Shen Yuan feel a little like he was trying to look directly into the sun. Shen Yuan blinked owlishly at him and finally managed a slow shake of his head. Hopefully, it looked like he'd been given the question real thought and not like he was no fucking clue what they were talking about, thanks to all the blood in his body rushing to his face. But thankfully nowhere else yet. No, I would need to check, and I don't have my... He lost the word and made a gesture he hoped to convey the concept of calendar thing. Bing had turned that lethal smile on Yu Qi and slid his phone over with a blank contact page open on the screen. Punch your number in, and I'll get back to you as soon as we know, he said, somehow smiling wider. He squeezed Shen Yuan lightly. It felt pretty good, actually. I'm sorry, Yu Qi said in the tone of someone who couldn't hold it in any longer. Who exactly are you? Liu Bingha. Bingha didn't take his phone back, nor did he offer details, leaving the burden of inquiry squarely on Yu Qi. Nice to meet you both. I've heard so much about you. He nodded at Shenju, but didn't take his gaze off Yu Qi. Shenju, meanwhile, looked like he was considering taking his phone out to start recording. His hand kept closing over it where it lay face down on the table, but then relaxing. And you know Xiao Yuan how? Yu Qi insisted. We were in school together until I moved away, Bingha said. We met up again recently after I moved back. It's been great getting to reconnect. I missed him a lot. I see, Yu Qi said tightly. Sorry to steal him away, but we came here to meet up with some friends. Bingha nodded towards one of the really good tables, the one you had to reserve weeks in advance because they were those padded round booths surrounded by hanging plants shot through with fairy lights. There was already a woman there dressed in red who was flipping through her phone with a bored expression, along with a man in navy blue button-down. His attention was on the table's third occupant, a mousy guy in slob flannel and a man bun who... Is that Shang fucking Qinghua? Shen Yuan surprised himself by growling. Even Bingha jumped in surprise. Shen Yuan's focus narrowed down to that table as he stood up, accidentally shedding Bingha's friendly arm. Sorry, he said absently to Shenju and Yu Qi. I've got to go. Send me an email about the details and I'll get back to you when I know what's up. A broad hand settled in the small of his back and he looked, startled, up at Bingha. He'd slid into Shen Yuan's space without so much as a ripple in Shen Yuan's situational awareness. When had Bingha gotten that quiet or poised? Been tripping all over himself every third step back in junior high, usually right into Shen Yuan's arms. We'll be in touch, Binghe told Yu Qi and Shenju as he took his phone back and then all but propelled Shen Yuan away from the table. Thanks, Shen Yuan said quietly as soon as he was sure he wouldn't be heard or seen saying it. His brain was back online and he realized the obvious. Binghe had come over to save him. Hopefully, he wasn't crashing Binghe's date with that lady in red, but there were 2 other people at the table, so probably not. He didn't examine any of the reasons why he might feel relieved about that. Unfortunately, he now knew what his childhood friend's arm felt like around his shoulders, and that, up close, Binghe smelled like Versace Eros. Binghe shot him a sideways wink that did things to Shen Yuan's poor insides. Any time, he muttered back with a flash of straight white teeth and a roguish sideways smile. Oh no. Shang Qinghua spotted Shen Yuan coming with the kind of expression people usually reserve for sharks or oncoming trains. Bro! His face froze into a rictus of false joy. Don't you bro me, asshole! Your final chapter drafts are 4 days late! Shen Yuan hissed as soon as they were close enough not to disturb the other nearby tables. What are you doing at brunch? That started the waterworks as Sheng Qinghua immediately began to whine for sympathy, listing all his creative setbacks and how he really needed the socialization time just to get past his block. You said you were done, the man in blue said over all that, with a sideways look that no one would have ignored except maybe Binghe, who was more interested in herding Shen Yuan into the booth and making him point at stuff on the menu. Oh hey, they had lemon cornmeal pancakes on the menu. Shen Qinghua froze and rotated his entire body to face what was probably his boyfriend, now that Shen Yuan was thinking about it, and could see where the man had his hand on Shen Qinghua's thigh. Almost, he pleaded. Practically done. I just need to rewrite the last 2 sections. Rewrite? Shen Yuan whisper shrieked, diverted from the menu, even as Binghe said something about the coconut cream stuffed French toast with bruleed pineapple and candied macadamias, which Shen Yuan distractedly agreed sound amazing, even though someone thought it was a good idea to name it Getting Caught in the Rain, and the description included the phrase rum reduction filled pipettes. Brunch was surprisingly okay. Shen Yuan and Shang Qinghua had a well-worn dynamic, which fit oddly well into the lazy predator vibe of everyone else at the table. Mobe Jun and Shang Hualing, possibly Binghe as well, were happy to watch Shen Yuan tear into his hapless victim until their food arrived. Binghe had mercifully gone to put in orders for both him and Shen Yuan while he went through the process of pinning his writer down into a promise that he would be back at the computer after brunch was over. Once he didn't have Shang Qinghua's crocodile tears to distract him, though, Shen Yuan's gaze was often drawn back to the table he'd just left. Shenju and Yu Qi were finishing their meal. It was kind of cute. Yu Qi was kind of like someone trying to win over a cat, offering bits of this and that, occasionally getting glared at, sometimes getting scratched. Like most cat people, he didn't let it deter him. In fact, Shenju's palatable scorn only seemed to spur him on. Binghe pulled Shen Yuan back into his side so that his shoulder eclipsed the other table from view. He had a vague notion that either Yu Qi or Shenju had been about to turn their way, but never saw for sure whether they did or not. Eventually they left, and the tension trickled out of Shen Yuan's body like water. He wasn't the only one who felt that way, apparently. Thank God, Shen Qinghua groaned as soon as they vanished out the door. I thought I was going to strain something, pretending I didn't see them. Doesn't Yu Qi hate counter-service restaurants, he complained. In fact, he did. Chigua didn't like the possibility of ordering his food only to find there was nowhere to sit. He wasn't comfortable with that kind of uncertainty. It didn't stop him from going to one if someone else wanted to, but Chigua never sought them out of his own accord, no matter how good the reviews were. Thanks, Bingha. Shen Yuan started to pull away. I appreciate the... Bingha's arm flexed and became about as flexible as an iron bar. Shen Yuan all but bounced back into Bingha's side. He looked at the man and asked, Bingha? Bingha wasn't looking at him. They'd gotten a bottomless mimosa flight, which came in the form of a bottle of sparkling wine for the table and different pitchers of fruit puree. All morning, he'd been experimenting with different combinations, working one-handed because of the arm he'd kept around Shen Yuan. Bingha, Shen Yuan dropped his voice. They left. You don't have to protect me anymore. That got Bingha's attention, and he finally looked over and said, I know, with a hard-to-qualify and lopsided smile. He didn't move his arm. He'd flashed through Shen Yuan's entire body, and he forced himself to look away before he did something insane, like ask Bingha if he'd been gay this entire time and Shen Yuan somehow missed it. Or bi? Maybe he was bi. What is your problem? Sha Hualing asked Shang Qinghua, who made such a face. Ling Ling, you're so lucky you just moved here, he complained. This has felt like a solid year of drama and pretending I didn't see them take everything I had, okay? I'm just a wee little mortal man. I wanted to see if I can figure out where they keep their audacity, even if it's rude. Shen Yuan couldn't help it. They're engaged, he said. No, Shang Qinghua gasped. It's been 2 months! What the actual fuck, bro? Finally, someone who got it. Ironically, though, it felt easier to let the bad feelings go all of a sudden. Shen Yuan couldn't tell if it was just the calm that arrived once a crisis had passed, or if being aggressively cuddled in public was just doing a lot for his ability to roll with the absurd. The situation had reached its logical conclusion, the confrontation was over, and there was basically nothing to be scared of anymore. Not my circus, not my monkeys, he sighed. They want me to go, but I think I'll send a nice present and fabricate some prior commitment. He was not quite yet in a place where he felt like he owed Shenju that much. They only suspected they might be related, and for the time being, Chigua's presence made it hard for them to figure out what a relationship between them might look like. Wow. So, Yuchi is actually one of those people who think you can still be friends afterwards? Shang Qinghua sat back down. I mean, I'm not surprised. He's weirdly so self-centered for such a nice guy. We can be friends eventually, Shen Yuan allowed, and realized it was true. It was like the end of his grief was in sight now, and he could picture a time when he'd be able to see those two and roll his eyes instead of wanting to escape. Just not right now. Right on. Shen Qinghua reached over for the puree pitchers. This old man will make you a drink, then we'll talk about something else. That would be amazing. Shen Yuan tentatively let himself relax into Binghe's warm side. Maybe it was his imagination, but he felt like the arm around him tightened. Eventually, the group broke up. Shen Yuan left the restaurant feeling full and a little buzzed. He'd gotten nothing done, but he'd given up being productive that morning the second he saw Shenju's text. Sha Hualing took off by herself, and Shang Qinghua followed Mobe Jun closely enough out the door that it was clear that wherever they were going there together. Binghe lingered as Shen Yuan collected his bag and some pastries from the counter for later self-medication in case this sudden serenity abandoned him once he was by himself. Then Binghe walked Shen Yuan out. As soon as they were outside, he asked, "What time should I pick up Yuangua tonight?" Shen Yuan blinked, interrupted in the middle of an intense fantasy of devouring the devil made me do it chocolate croissant in his bag just as soon as he had room in his stomach for more. He'd gotten it as a just in case, but as soon as he smelled it, he wanted nothing more than to inhale it. Unfortunately, there was no room left in his stomach. Even his pants felt tight. Binghe still wants to hang out? Shen Yuan asked, a little startled. We didn't catch up. Binghe thrust his hands in his pockets and somehow aged 10 years in a reverse, though through nothing but a posture and a slight widening of his eyes. I want the chance to have Yuan Gua to myself. Oh no, the heat was back. Don't say it like that. Shen Yuan ducked his gaze. His ears felt like they were on fire. He covered his mouth with his free hand so Binghe couldn't see the weird, confused, and possibly disappointed grimace it was insisting on shaping itself into. I'll misunderstand. Are you? Binghe's voice was a lot closer all of a sudden, and when Shen Yuan looked up, he was right there. Binghe lost his smile and leaned in until their faces were so close that it would take no effort at all to kiss him. Are you really misunderstanding me? I can be more clear if Yuan Gua wants. Shen Yuan squeaked. Binghe is straight? It came out like a question. Binghe shook his head very slowly, very deliberately. I want to take Yuan Gua out on a date. He enunciated every single word. His tone got lower with each pause until it hit a register that made the hair on Shen Yuan's body all stand on end. I want to take Yuan Gua out on a lot of dates. Romantic dates, if that wasn't clear. Romantic? There's no way he could misinterpret that. Binghe wanted, but why? Unfortunately, Shen Yuan's libido, once it was awakened and engaged, was faster on the draw than his self-doubt. Okay. Shen Yuan's voice came out at a pitch probably only dogs could hear, but Binghe smiled anyway, and if the quick flashes of that lopsided smile Shen Yuan had been subjected to before now were unbearable, then this one killed him on the spot with its unadulterated joy. Will 5 work for you? I have all the work I was supposed to do this morning. Still have to get done. I'll pick you up then, Binghe said, and finally released Shen Yuan into the wild. Did Shen Yuan go finish his work? Nope. No, he did not. He made the mistake of looking at his clock and realized it was 12:30. Shen Yuan had the most important date of his life in T-minus 4 hours, and nothing in his closet was even remotely up to the task. He was going to have to call a car and buy something. Work could happen later. Life was happening now. Finn. Notes. I based this on an absolutely awful video clip I saw on Facebook from a show that I will now never watch, where a woman was having dinner with her extremely punchable ex-husband and his new wife. But she did not have a glorious himbo to ride to her rescue, so I wrote this to exercise my feelings about it. It's not a coincidence that Luo Binghe was in the bathroom when Shen Yuan got there. Luo Binghe was actually looking like that when he first came in, but when he saw Shen Yuan entering the restaurant, recognized him, panicked, and evacuated to de-escalate his wardrobe. Luo Binghe, no! Yuan Gua can't know I'm a thought! I mean, later, he figures out that Shen Yuan is weak against himbos and turns it up like 5 notches. Luo Binghe turns out to be a fantastic dynamic correction for that group. His boundaries are guarded by tall walls, razor wire, and vicious dogs, so now Shen Yuan's are too. He will not hesitate to tell Yu Qi to back off, which has the unexpected side effect of giving Shen Yuan and Shen Zhu a space to explore their relationship. Yes, they're blood brothers. Their mom died in that car accident, and their biological dad wasn't able to cope with being a single parent, so he surrendered his kids. Neither of them give a solitary fuck about finding him. Shen Yuan got adopted by a nice couple who already had a family but couldn't have more kids for health reasons even though they wanted to. Shenju was not an adorable toddler, so he ended up in a group home run by the Chus that mysteriously burned down at some point. Shenju has no idea how that happened. So weird. Must have been their terrible wiring and decrepit flammable furniture. He's heard that's a thing. No one could prove anything, so that's how he ended up with in the oh, it kind of just cuts off, but that's probably how he ended up in the other home. The group home. Things I have said in my group chat about this fic. Quick, what's the most pretentious brunch dish you could think of? Man, that feeling when you realize that you accidentally cast the American foster care system as the endless abyss, and honestly, it ain't a bad fit. I guess Wu Yanzi is being played by the troubled teen industry then. White moonlight, if you didn't already know, is a phrase that refers to someone's tragic lost love who's usually dead, and it's usually implied that you never truly get over them. And then here's kind of how you can find the Feels Whale. Here is my usual Tumblr plug. Come visit me at the Feels Whale. My Twitter is https twitter.com/miscellea. If you're interested in my original project, swing by and visit me on Royal Road. I'm miscellea there. And it's www.royalroad.com/profile/175208. And my current original project is called #FairyPrincessProblems. Come check it out. So just a reminder, this is part 1 of Brunch Warfare and other sorties. And then the one tomorrow is going to be the second parter, so from Lua Bingha's point of view, and it will be best served cold, of course, by the Feels Whale miscellea. So that'll be tomorrow. So make sure to come join us, same time, same place, to hear Lua Bingha's perspective. Thank you again to the Feels Whale miscellea for letting me play in your playground. I had a great time, and I will enjoy having another great time tomorrow. For everyone listening, remember, go visit them, give them a kudos, give them a like, give them a favorite. Bookmark, not a favorite. Yeah, subscribe to them and let them know what you think. They're pretty cool, and they have a lot of really cool stories. So go check them out. Bye-bye!